Hi, this is Squirrel Trails, and I'm Al. You'd normally see David with me, but right now we're doing something a little different so we can get our release cycle out for the Monday release. The last couple that we've been working on going through the editing process, one of them's got some things I want to true up on the accuracy aspects. It's materially correct, but I want to make sure it's solid, so we're going to have to redo some of that one. And the last one, we had a little technical glitch, as he's talked about in some of our releases, so we're going to be working on that and make sure that that's there. So you get something that maybe a little more or a little less entertaining, as the case may be, that I'm going to be doing on my own, simply so we've got something out there. It's on a schedule and is still relevant and timely. So we're going to be talking about today is the most recent Microsoft release, patch release, came out in May 14th, 2019. 80 some odd or 80 different items in that release, of which, entertainingly enough, they're releasing items that for devices that have been out of support for years. And why would they do that? Okay, so article that I was looking at this week came out of Computer Center. Nice website. They talked about the release of Microsoft patches on May 14th, 2019. And the fact that that they were releasing systems, releasing patches for XP and Windows 2000, Server 2003, which have been out of support for years. And why would they do that? Well, the simple fact of the matter is people are still running those systems. One of the hardest things about software maintenance and patching and security is that software never really dies. It can continue to run forever and ever. And that's particularly true when systems have been around as long as Windows XP. And Windows XP was released in 2001. Support stopped in 2009, with extended support stopping in 2014. So if you think about it, 8 years out in support is a very long time for a Windows system. It was running around out there and just ubiquitous across the environment, just all over the place. You'd run into Windows, as you should expect to see Windows XP. It was a nice, stable release. People liked it. It was a good running system, and people were comfortable with it. And to be honest, they didn't want to get off of it because another later release of Windows, Vista, was not particularly well received. So one of the things about computer folks is that we can be just a little bit conservative on things that we're a little scared about. It's an interesting thing about computer folks. We like new technology. We like to new and play with new things. But we're going to be running it on computer systems that our business supports and that we need to ensure that our customers are going to be able to use. We can be conservative. And we need to be conservative in that case. Because keeping the lights on is kind of a mantra within the IT field. In many cases, keeping the lights on will trump security. Because you can't run a business if the lights aren't on and the computer systems aren't running. That becomes a very big deal with out-of-date software, as we're seeing within Windows XP. So just to run through the Windows XP stuff, as of last month, April 2019, they still were running 1.5% of all Windows devices were still running Windows XP, based upon a service that runs out and checks what operating systems are in the environment. Boy, that would be an interesting routine. I would like to see all of their data because I would be really interested to see how old some of the stuff is that's running out there. And the other thing to remember about that is that's only the devices that it can see. So that's not even going to touch systems that are running that are not internet facing or can't be seen through the internet. So that's a pretty large number of devices that are out there that for a system that went out of extended support in 2019. Check that, in 2014. Now, to be honest, there is a version of Windows XP, the embedded version, that just came out of support in April of 2019. Because Microsoft and everybody else realizes that when you're going to load an operating system into a device that's going to be it's embedded within the device, that needs to run for a very long time because nobody wants to replace that software frequently. So in that case, typically they let those things run out there 5, 6, 7, 8 years because that's an expected life that's out there. Now the reality is you may see systems running much longer than that out in the environment, especially out in out of the way places that don't get support on a regular basis. There's not a lot of support within the environment, or there's just not a lot of money out there. And so those systems can run around for a very long time. Now, the interesting thing with XP is that about 95% of all the ATMs in the world as of 2014 were running Windows XP. So that's a lot of them. You have to think about where you see ATMs out in the environment. I've done a fair amount of travel for a variety of reasons, and you'll see ATMs in the darndest places in Southeast Asia. You'll see them sitting in the Middle East, obviously. People use money, obviously, and so they need to have ATM supports out there. And an ATM is a very easy way to provide some basic banking support out in what you might think of as the hinterlands. And sometimes those hinterlands are also up in the hills or out in the desert valleys of the United States. It's just not out in third world countries that you'll see out-of-date hardware and software. You're going to see that all over the place just because of the cycle of trying to maintain them. So what happened? Why did they decide that they needed to do this release now? Well, so in 2017, we had the WannaCry attack come out, and that hit hundreds of thousands of computers. People were not able to access their systems without paying a Bitcoin ransom. Not going to get into the details on it, but it was using a attack that had been developed by the NSA, released by the shadow brokers, and that targeted at Windows XP. And as part of that attack, it was, if you'd had patched systems, it would not have impacted you. However, as we found out by the hundreds of thousands of devices that were successfully breached, not everybody was running the most current patches. And that is a problem that's when it's come into. So Windows had found another challenge with that. They did release an emergency patch in 2017 for that attack. And because of another vulnerability that they found within this, they've now released the most recent patch. So that's 2 times Microsoft has had to release emergency patches for the Windows XP environment after it ended extended support. So why do we have systems running out there that are no longer supported, even where you're getting extended support? Well, the fact of the matter is business systems are very complex. The challenges that we've got are that as you build an operating system and you run an application on top of that, and you may have some middleware running in there, all these things have to fit together. And as you design them to work together, anytime you make a change on some of those, you may impact that ability to successfully run. And computer systems have to work for businesses to operate these days. And IT folks, while generally like to play with new technologies, the challenges that you're going to have is you don't want to impact your business. Keeping the lights on is a very, very strong mantra within IT. CIOs get very grumpy. In fact, one of them actually put out a book called Keeping the Lights On. And keeping the lights on will actually trump security in some situations because business has to run. This is a case of risk management. Risk management is, just part of the deal. You have to actually think about what's going to occur when you make a patch. If you make a patch and you haven't tested it correctly, or you haven't thought about all the ramifications, which would probably include not testing it correctly, it could bring down your systems. And I've seen that. And I think anybody that's been around the IT environment has seen that. I think the most interesting one I saw several years back ago was where somebody loaded out a patch to a system support operation that literally put every Windows Server on its side in that environment. That was a tad embarrassing, and the next day's problem call was even more exciting. These kinds of things can happen, and that's why ensuring that everything links together is important. So out-of-date software will drive complexities in your environment, and the complexities become even larger with the more systems that you've got in play. And this is one reason why IT professionals like to keep the number of operating systems, the number of applications, the sheer environment to as simple as you can, just to be able to maintain that support. The more weirdness that you have in your environment, literally the more weirdness you're going to have in your support processes, and probably the more outages that you're going to have. And potentially the larger your security weaknesses are going to be because of the way these things all fit together. So let's think about you're a system administrator and you've got a Windows operating system or whatever operating system it might be, and it's come up out of support. And you know it's going to go out of support, and you've got years to figure this stuff out because typically this is released a long time in advance. So you start thinking about where these things are going to play. And you now say, okay, well, I've got to make sure application X is going to run on this operating system that's coming out, that's going to be released. Is it compatible with that? Well, what happens if application X was written by a third party that is no longer around? How are you going to manage that? How are you going to maintain that? What are you going to do to ensure that that runs? That's a very real situation and happens literally all the time. Software companies come and go. And yes, you may maintain an escrow copy of their source code or systems so that you can provide support, but you don't know enough to be able to know how it runs. So that becomes a major issue. So quite often, if you have a major change in an operating system, you may end up having to actually replace software that's going to create even a larger, complex environment for you. So let's go back. Why would you want to run out-of-date software? Well, most people don't. Let's be absolutely honest. System administrators do not like to run things that are not going to be supported. So they have no desire to do this. It's not that the fact that they're lazy or they just don't know. The challenge is when you're replacing something as ubiquitous in your environment as an operating system, it has a lot of tendrils that are out there. And you have to think about what are all those connected. Now, there's lots of good articles on how to approach an out-of-date software and what to do with that. So we've talked about the fact that Windows XP is out there, it's still running, and probably running in a lot of places that we don't even know about. And we know that it's still being actively attacked. Simply because it's no longer in support doesn't mean that it's not being attacked. Of course it's going to be attacked. If I'm an attacker, I'm going to go after things that I know are likely going to be weak. And out-of-support software is the very first place to go. Now, you would wonder, is it allowed to run out-of-date software? Well, allowed by who? I mean, it's your environment, it's your company. Are you going to be able to choose to run or not run that system? And those are risk decisions that you have to think about. Now, if you're running under payment card industries, yeah, your stuff has to be supported. You have to be able to get current patches on those things. And that's true in a lot of other, say, government contract systems or where you've got third-party agreements where you're running software for others. But if it's just your own system, maybe not. But you have to balance that risk equation as to, do I want to continue running this environment that I know is no longer going to be supported, that's going to have patches, that it's not going to have patches, geez, and may not be able to get any operational updates as needed. What's that going to mean to me? Well, what's going to probably happen is it's going to be attacked. Now, of course, I'm going to want to replace that. But what's the challenge of replacing that? Okay, well, I'm just going to install a new version of the operating system. Well, that's not going to work because you've probably got systems that are not application systems that aren't compatible to that. So if a particular application is using a call or a routine that doesn't exist in the newer version of the operating system, it's simply not going to execute correctly. And that was particularly true with Windows XP because that was a change in the basic format of some of that operating system. We went from 32-bit to 64-bit processing. That became a very big deal. And so a lot of places have gone through huge changes to get through that. So, and you can see that it's simply in the time it took to get the systems from an out of support situation to out of extended support. I mean, there was a 5-year run there. So there are a lot of folks who are still trying to run that through. And in all honesty, we're paying for additional support even beyond that as they try to work through some of the challenges of doing this. So if you're running applications and you change out an operating system or a middleware, it may not run any longer. And if your application doesn't run, your business doesn't run. If your business doesn't run, the IT folks are going to get in a lot of trouble. So if you're running an out-of-date system and you replace that operating system and it's not compatible with your application, and then your application doesn't run, that means your business doesn't run. And if your business doesn't run, you're out of business. That's kind of obvious, but just the case that it is. And so IT people will continue to run some out-of-date systems until they can ensure that compatibility. Now, the challenge with XP as it came out was it was literally running the vast majority, 95% of ATMs were running on XP. It was 50% of all devices in China were running on XP, or Windows devices were running on XP. There are, when a system's been that embedded in the culture and that embedded in the environment, it's really hard to make a change because people have written special routines for that. So how do you avoid that situation? Well, the first thing you want to think about is how many different tools do you have running in your environment? How many applications, how many operating systems, middleware? If you're a smaller organization, you want to keep that to a minimum. Just because the less complexity you have in your environment, the less opportunity you have for system failures and for as well as security challenges. The problem with a major organization like a large bank or a large manufacturing company, a lot of that stuff just comes in and you don't even know it. People load stuff and load operating systems and load applications in the environment. It's really hard to control that. So folks spend an awful lot of time trying to manage that. And as we've moved into the more agile CI/CD world, where everything's going to go faster, there is more of a tendency to actually run more complex environments because people want to try new systems when they're running in there. I would make a case that as you are running a fully automated agile CI/CD environment, the less complex your environment is, the more you're going to be able to support rapid release into your environment because you know things are going to work. You're going to have fewer failures. So the other thing to think about in your environment to try to reduce the complexities is how old is my environment? If I'm running a payroll application or I'm running a general ledger application that I know works, I really don't want to change it. But the problem is I'm probably going to have to as we get changes in the environment. My general rule of thumb is N-1. I never like to be out on the bleeding edge of a new release because that's just simply dangerous. You don't know what's going to go out there, and to be honest, the software industry these days has a tendency to release something that in their first release probably isn't as solid as it was 30 years ago. So there's a lot more, if you would, beta releases as production. So you want to be careful with that. So I try to generally if I'm looking at a project, I like to see that they're running at least a release behind what's ever out there as the most recent release, just to know that we've had somebody else has worked through those bugs on there. That helps reduce the complexities. The other thing that you want to do is document. I mean, document. I know nobody likes to do this, but understanding how all your systems work together is really important. If you don't understand that linkage of your systems, you're going to have something go sideways. It happens time and time again when somebody throws up a new environment and they start cutting stuff over to it. and they find out that there was a off-the-wall application that was running some kind of critical function that would no longer work within that. So it's important to be able to know where those exist. I would make a case, a very strong case, that if you've been doing your right business continuity planning, so you've been thinking about your disaster recovery, which is important no matter what size of business you are. Um, Especially for a small business, you probably can't afford to be down very long. It's important to be able to document where all these things fit together, because if you don't have that documentation and you haven't built that business continuity environment, you may very well not going to be able to recover. An example I'll give you is one that happened in Phoenix a long time ago, in which a large furniture company got flooded. You wouldn't think flooding would be a big deal in Phoenix, but when you build your data center on the floodplain of the river and they release water in the river, yeah, you get a flood. And in that situation, obviously their data center was lost, as was all their backup files, because all their backup systems were also maintained in that data center. And entertainingly enough, all their hard copy backups were also in that facility, because it was very convenient to store everything in one large operating system. And when that, check that, in one large operating environment. And when that happened, they lost everything. And when they couldn't, because they didn't have any documentation to be able to then reconstruct from what little they had, they ended up really closing and going away. So when the auditors get after you about business continuity, it's going to help you in a lot of different ways. By being able to know where your systems are, know how they're connected, know what they're going to be able to, know where those systems are coming to play, you're going to be able to use that documentation when you start looking at out-of-date software. The other thing is testing. Obviously, testing to know what's going to work. So I'm going to go back, kind of wrap this thing up a little bit. The key components that you want to think about is, when you're running kind of systems, is reduce the complexity in your environment as much as you can. That's going to be hard, but you need to manage that, because when you reduce your complexity, you're going to be reducing your risk. And that means you should be able to actually reduce the cost of maintaining your systems. It kind of goes without saying, and most system professionals want to maintain that reduction as well. Their biggest challenge is people like you, business users, that want all the neat new stuff that's coming out. So recognize that whenever you are wanting something new in the environment, you are introducing risk, and you are introducing that complexity. And it's going to take a while to potentially roll that stuff out if it's really within the basics of your environment. Release the number of versions that you've got. That helps reduce the complexity. Maintain the patches where you can, and have a good patch update routine. That's hard to do, because every time you release a patch, you do introduce the opportunity of a system failure. But keep that cycle up and current, because the more current you are across the environment, again, you reduce that complexity. If you're running a system that's 10 years old, on an application that's potentially even older than that in some of the mainframe environments, you're going to have a huge challenge keeping that stuff current. So try to keep your environments as current as you can, and deal with that risk a little bit at a time as you do the release. Because if you're going to go up several releases at one time, you're going to introduce a much higher risk to your environment, and you want to stop that. Document. Obviously, I said that before. Know what your environment looks like. Make sure you've got that well documented. You understand how things are linking together. Make sure you know that data flow. You're supposed to have that anyway for all sorts of reasons, not just contractual requirements like PCI and some others, but just being able to maintain those systems is important. Know what's in your environment. If you can't manage your inventory, you can't manage your environment. Know what your systems are, know what's out there, scan for them, and inventory them. One of the top 2 security controls out there is understanding and maintaining an inventory of your hardware and maintaining an inventory of your software. If you can't manage that, then there's no way you can manage these situations when you have a new release that comes out, and you're likely going to break something. And that's just simply the way it is. So Reduce your complexity, document what you've got, uh, validate to make sure it's current, and test. Keep that up, and when you have a system that is as old as XP is and you're still running it, understand how you're going to be able to execute and start getting off of those systems. The other thing is, and if you can't, and in some cases you can't, understand what's touchable out there. Simply because something is behind a firewall doesn't mean that it's safe. It means that it's less likely to be attacked, but it can be used by somebody that's breached an environment elsewhere. The thing to remember about your environments is they're all linked together. Any given system that can talk to another system creates that linkage and creates that risk. So in this case, I'm running XP, but it's running behind a firewall, so why should I care? Well, if the firewall is breached doing another attack, I now have an XP system which can be used to jump off an attack, be used for attacks on the internal network. And that's really what we might call walking the network. And that's a very real method of getting from one place to another, and the attack spreads. So it simply firewalling your environment doesn't reduce that risk completely. It does do some, and it's an important tool to have. But these days, when we have so much that's cloud connected and third-party connected, the real challenge is, what is my perimeter, and how do I manage that, and how do I know what that is? Interconnectedness is a big deal these days. All of that creates these challenges as you start looking at updates. And in this situation, because the challenge was big enough, Microsoft did choose to release a new patch to be able to deal with that. We can't always count on that. So if you're running out of support software, you need to be thinking about what to do about it. So in summary, as I rambled all over the place, well, we do call it squirrel trails for a reason. So in summary, Microsoft released in May 14, 2019, a series of 80 different patches, which included patches for Windows XP and Windows 2003, which have not been Windows Server 2003, which have not been in support for a very long time. So the reason they had to do that is because it's still sitting out there in the environment, and folks are running it, because it is hard to get rid of software even when it's no longer supported. And people just don't like to do it because of the complexities. So it's important to be able to reduce the complexities in your environment so you can get rid of that out-of-date software. And that includes complexities within operating systems, hardware, software, because in many cases, some of the situations can be hardware as well, as you have specialized hardware devices which come into play. And it's really true within applications. So from my perspective, as somebody that's been a risk professional and an auditor in the technology fields, I've not been a system administrator, let's be very clear on that. So there's somebody out there that's probably going to beat me on this. But from my perspective, the key is understand what's in your environment, understand how it's linked together, understand and try to maintain currency as much as you can, and plan for these things where you've got specialized hardware and software in your environment. It's particularly true in manufacturing systems, and I'm going to say small businesses, it's a huge issue because nobody likes to buy new software. But you're going to have to do that. And the more you can do it in a planful way, the less challenges you're going to have in your environment, and the less subject you're going to be to both operational failures and security weaknesses. So get out there, find out what's in your environment. Understand what its level of support is, and if it's not something that is currently supported or is probably going to go out of support soon, start thinking about, just as you would with your car or any other big asset in your environment, think about its life cycle. Think about what it's going to take to get off of that environment and onto something new when the time comes, so that it's not a surprise and you can't do it. Use your business continuity program to help plan for that. And if you don't have a business continuity plan, okay, let's talk about that. That is something you really need to do, because that's going to make your world better. All right, this is Al from Squirrel Trails. Take care, and we'll see how this goes. So this is Al from Squirrel Trails. Thank you very much for your time. Enjoy watching these. Please subscribe, like it if you did, and more importantly, provide me comments as to what we can do to improve. This is something I'm enjoying doing, but it needs to have value to others because otherwise I'm just talking to myself. And my psychiatrist says that's a bad thing. So, at any rate, like and subscribe and hit the buttons as appropriate. I never can remember where there are because I have gray hair. So, enjoy, take care, and we'll see you next time.